She kept walking, just like they told her to. One foot in front of the other, the gravel crunching under her worn-out shoes. Three little boys trailed behind her, their small hands clutching hers, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. And then there was the single suitcase, its wheels wobbling on the uneven dirt road, carrying the weight of their entire world. The town was behind them now, a collection of closed doors and judgmental eyes. The whispers had followed her all the way to the edge of town, cruel words that stuck to her like burrs. "She's no good," they'd said. "Look at her, dragging those poor kids down with her." This was it, she thought, the end of the road. The place where hope finally gave up and died. She'd fought so hard for so long, but it seemed like her past was a shadow she could never outrun. The town hadn't just closed its doors. It had slammed them shut, leaving her and her boys out in the cold, with nowhere to go. Every step away felt like another nail in the coffin of her dreams. Just as a tear threatened to escape, a figure emerged from the dust kicked up by the afternoon wind. A cowboy. He was leaning against a weathered fence post, his hat tipped low, casting a shadow over his face. He had dust on his boots, the kind that spoke of long days and hard work. As he pushed himself off the fence and walked toward them, she braced herself for more judgment, another lecture, another reason why she didn't belong. But when he looked at her, his eyes held something she hadn't seen in a very, very long time. Not pity, not disgust, but a deep, knowing pain that mirrored her own. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze softening as he looked from her to the three small boys huddled by her side. Then he spoke, his voice raspy but kind, and said the words that shattered the silence and her despair. "You're home now, home." The word hung in the air, foreign and yet so desperately craved. She looked at him, bewildered. This stranger, this cowboy with sorrow in his eyes, was offering a lifeline she didn't even know she was searching for. What happened in that moment, on that dusty road at the edge of a town that had rejected her, was the beginning of everything. It was the start of a story that would forever change the lives of four broken people, proving that sometimes the longest, hardest roads are the ones that lead you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes rejection isn't an ending. It's just a detour on the path to finally belonging. His name was Jake. He owned the sprawling ranch that bordered the town, a piece of land big enough to be its own world. He led her and the boys, Leo, Sam, and Noah down the long driveway to a small, charming guest house nestled among ancient oak trees. It was simple, clean, and felt safer than any place she'd been in years. She learned that Jake was a widower, his own heart scarred by a loss that had quieted his spirit and isolated him from the world. He saw the same loneliness in her eyes that he felt in his own soul. He didn't ask about her past, not at first. He just gave her space, a roof over her head, and simple chores to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. He showed the boys how to mend fences, how to care for the horses, how to find constellations in the vast, starry sky. For the first time, she saw her sons laugh freely, their small shoulders relaxing from the constant tension of being unwanted. But the town's shadow was long. Soon whispers made their way to the ranch. People started talking. The same folks who had cast her out now looked at Jake with suspicion. Why would he take in someone like her? They'd mutter at the general store. "He's making a mistake." The pressure began to build. A few of the ranch hands, loyal to Jake for years, grew uncomfortable. They started treating her with a coldness that felt chillingly familiar. One afternoon, the town's sheriff paid a visit, not officially, but as a concerned friend. He warned Jake that associating with her could tarnish his family's name, a name that had been respected in this valley for generations. He hinted that her past was darker than Jake could imagine and that trouble always followed her. That night, she packed her single suitcase again. She couldn't bear to be the storm that wrecked this good man's life. She wrote him a note, thanking him for his kindness, and prepared to slip away with her boys before dawn. As she tried to sneak out, she found Jake sitting on the porch of the main house, a single lantern casting a warm glow around him. It was as if he knew. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Running away won't fix anything," he said softly. She stopped, her heart pounding. "I can't let them ruin you because of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jake stood up and walked over to her. He gently took the suitcase from her hand and set it down. "This is my home," he said, his voice firm. "And I decide who belongs here, not the town. Not the whispers. Me." He looked her straight in the eye. "You and those boys, you belong here." He then told her about his late wife, about the accident that took her, and about the crushing loneliness that followed. He explained that helping her and the boys. It was the first time in years he'd felt like he had a purpose again. He wasn't saving her. In a way, they were saving him. His confession changed everything. She decided to stay and fight. Not with anger, but with quiet dignity. She worked harder than anyone on the ranch. She learned to ride, to manage the books, to help birth a calf in the middle of a storm. The boys thrived, growing stronger and more confident under Jake's gentle guidance. Slowly, painstakingly, things began to shift. Some of the ranch hands, seeing her unwavering dedication, started to come around. They saw how she cared for the animals, how she comforted a spooked horse, how she treated everyone with a respect she was so rarely given. They saw the light returning to Jake's eyes. A few people from town, the ones with kinder hearts, started to see it too. The local schoolteacher noticed how bright and polite the boys were. The owner of the feed store saw the genuine partnership between her and Jake. They began to see a family, not a scandal. The true turning point came during the annual county fair. A flash flood, sudden and violent, swept through the fairgrounds. Panic erupted. Amidst the chaos, a section of the old wooden bleachers collapsed, trapping a group of children, including the sheriff's own daughter. While others froze in fear, she and Jake sprang into action. Using their combined knowledge of the land and sheer determination, they organized a rescue. She calmed the terrified children, her voice a steady anchor in the storm, while Jake and the other ranchers worked to clear the debris. She used her own body to shield the sheriff's little girl from falling wreckage until she could be pulled to safety. In that moment, covered in mud and rain, her only concern was the well-being of others. The whole town saw it. They saw her courage, her selflessness, her strength. They didn't see her past. They saw who she was right now. After the flood, the whispers finally died, replaced by words of gratitude and respect. The sheriff came to the ranch, not to warn Jake, but to thank her, his eyes filled with tears. He apologized for his judgment, for listening to gossip instead of seeing the person in front of him. It was a quiet, profound moment of healing for the entire community. The doors that had once slammed shut began to creak open. People started to smile at her in town, to ask after her boys, to treat her not as an outcast but as a neighbor, as one of them. One evening, as she and Jake watched the boys chase fireflies in the twilight, he took her hand. The pain in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep and abiding love. "I told you you were home," he said, his voice full of emotion, and she finally was. She had found her place, not by erasing her past, but by building a future so bright it cast no shadows. It was a long, hard road, but it had led her, and her 3 little boys, to a family, a community, and a love that had been waiting for them all along. The widow arrived at Cedar Ridge just before sunset, when the sky burned orange and the wind carried the smell of hay and old promises. Her name was Elena Harper, though no one in this dusty town asked. She held her youngest son's hand tightly, a fragile anchor, as if the very ground itself might try to steal him away. Her other 2 boys, just a few steps ahead, were playing a game of pretending to be brave, pretending they weren't hungry, pretending they weren't terrified of what the coming night held. It had been 2 winters since she buried her husband. A ranch accident, a snapped rope, a single brutal moment that had unraveled their entire world. In the time since, doors that were once open had begun to close, softly at first. There were sympathetic smiles and polite refusals, but as the months turned into years, the refusals grew harder, colder. A widow with 3 sons, she learned, was seen as a burden. People said it with their eyes, with their averted glances. Too many mouths to feed, too much past to carry, too much trouble. Cedar Ridge was supposed to be different. She'd clutched onto stories whispered on the trail, stories of second chances, of honest work, of land that didn't judge a person by their name or their sorrows. But as Elena stepped into the town square, a hush fell over the evening crowd. Conversations sputtered and died. Eyes lingered on her, on the boys, on their worn clothes. Some looked away quickly as if her hardship was a contagious disease. Others did not bother to hide their scrutiny. Her first stop was the boarding house. The woman behind the counter let her eyes travel from the boys' tired faces, down to Elena's scuffed shoes, and finally to the single worn coin she placed carefully on the wooden desk. The woman let out a long sigh. It wasn't unkind, but it certainly wasn't kind either. "I'm sorry," she said, the words practiced and smooth. "We're full." Elena just nodded. She had learned long ago that arguing only made things worse. It sharpened the pity into annoyance. So she gathered her sons and her dignity and left. Next came the general store, then the mill, and finally the small white church at the end of the dusty road. Each door she approached offered the same answer, just dressed in different words. Not enough space. Not hiring right now. Maybe try the next town over. By the time the last sliver of sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple, the boy's shoulders sagged with the weight of the day's rejections. The youngest, Noah, tugged at her sleeve, his voice small and trembling. "Mom, are we going to sleep outside again?" Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. She knelt in the dirt, the grit pressing into her knees, and brushed a stray piece of dust from his hair. She smiled the kind of smile that mothers learn to perfect, when their hearts are breaking into 1,000 pieces. "Not tonight," she said, a promise she had no idea how to keep. That was when they heard it. A man's voice, low, steady, a voice accustomed to open land and hard days. "You folks lost?" They all turned. He was leaning against a weathered fence at the edge of the square, a silhouette against the fading light. A cowboy, broad shoulders, a sun-worn face, and eyes that looked like they had seen both violence and mercy, and had learned to tell the difference. His name was Caleb Ross, though Elena didn't know it yet. But the town did. The whole town knew Caleb Ross. They knew he had lost his own family years ago. A fire, a tragedy that left behind a silence that never fully left him. Since then, he kept to himself, running a sprawling spread just outside of town. He was a man who spoke little, but he watched more than he spoke. And he had been watching Elena all afternoon. She straightened up, her body instinctively forming a protective shield around her sons. "We're just passing through," she said. The lie sounded thin and brittle even to her own ears. Caleb's gaze moved from her to the boys. He saw the way the oldest, Daniel, tried to stand taller than he was, puffing out his chest. He saw the middle one, Samuel, clenching his small fists at his sides. And he saw little Noah, clinging to his mother's skirt like it was the only lifeline he had left. "Town's been unkind," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Elena's silence was answer enough. From the shadows of a nearby porch, someone muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "She's got 3 kids." Another voice whispered back, laced with suspicion. "Trouble follows that kind of past." Caleb heard them all. He pushed himself off the fence and stepped forward into the dim light. "You don't need to pass through," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Then he raised it, so every listening ear in the square could hear him clearly. "You're home now." The words landed like a thunderclap in the quiet evening. There were audible gasps, a few grumbles of protest. Someone laughed, a bitter sharp sound. "Are you serious, Ross?" "You don't owe her a thing." Caleb didn't turn to face them. His eyes, steady and unwavering, stayed on Elena. "I know," he said simply. "That's why it matters." Elena felt something inside her chest crack. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was pure, raw disbelief. After so long, kindness felt like a foreign language. "Sir," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "We don't want charity." Caleb gave a slow nod of understanding. "Good, I don't offer charity, I offer work. A roof over your heads. A place where kids can grow without being counted like debts on a ledger." The boys looked up at their mother, their eyes wide. A tiny flicker of hope, so often extinguished, dared to light up again in their faces. The entire town watched, holding its breath, as Elena Harper stood at a crossroads. She had to make the hardest decision of her life, to trust a stranger when the world had given her every single reason not to. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. "We won't be easy," she warned him, her gaze as direct as his. For the first time, Caleb allowed the smallest hint of a smile to touch his lips. "Neither is the land," he replied. As Elena and her boys followed Caleb away from the square, whispers trailed behind them like persistent shadows. Some said it would fail. Others predicted it would end in disaster. They said he was a fool, and she was a burden he would soon regret. But what none of them could see, what none of them could possibly understand, was what was already beginning in that quiet walk toward a distant ranch house. It was a slow, stubborn healing. A mending of 2 broken pasts, a journey that would test them, challenge them, and change them all in ways they could never imagine. Because sometimes, The very place that rejects you is only preparing you for the place that will finally claim you as its own. And for Elena, Caleb, and the three boys, this was only the beginning. The ranch sat beyond the last bend of the dirt road, a world away from the town's judging eyes. Here, under a wide open sky, was a house that had once known laughter, then grief, and finally, a deep, heavy silence. As Elena and her three sons stepped onto the porch, the old floorboards creaked, as if waking from a long, lonely sleep. The middle son, Luke, looked around, his voice a whisper. "This is big." Caleb, the rancher, set their single suitcase down gently. "Big doesn't have to mean lonely," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Not if you fill it right." The first nights were filled with an uneasy quiet. Elena slept with one eye open, startled by every creak and groan of the old house. Loss had been a harsh teacher, and it had taught her never to fully relax. The boys, too, were hesitant, sticking close to their mother, unsure how long this newfound kindness would last. Caleb, a man who understood grief all too well, gave them space. He knew that healing couldn't be rushed. It had to be coaxed out, gently and patiently. As the sun rose the next morning, so did a new routine. Work became their anchor. Elena found solace in the rhythm of the kitchen, cooking and cleaning, learning the pulse of the land. The boys were put to work with chores, feeding chickens, mending fences, and hauling water. Their city-soft hands blistered quickly, their movements clumsy and unsure. But Caleb never mocked them. His corrections were quiet, his encouragement constant. He once found the oldest, Ethan, struggling to lift a heavy sack of grain. "You don't have to be strong all at once," Caleb told him. "Strength grows when someone believes you'll get there." And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a change began to ripple through them. The boys' laughter, once a rare sound, started to echo across the yard. They slept deeper, their nightmares fading with the dawn. The youngest, Noah, finally stopped asking if they would have to leave tomorrow. One afternoon, while kneading dough, Elena caught herself humming an old tune, a melody she hadn't touched since her husband was alive. The realization hit her with the force of a wave, and she found herself in the barn, silent tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. Caleb found her there, her shoulders shaking. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply handed her a clean cloth and sat nearby, a silent, supportive presence. Close enough to share the burden, but far enough to honor her private grief. "I forgot how to breathe," she finally admitted, her voice thick with emotion. Caleb just nodded, his own past reflected in his eyes. "I forgot once too, but the town hadn't forgotten them." Whispers followed Elena like a shadow whenever she went for supplies. Some townsfolk refused to meet her gaze. Others stared, their judgment a palpable weight in the air. One man's prejudice was spoken aloud, sharp and cruel. "A widow with 3 sons doesn't belong on a ranch run by one man." Word of this got back to Caleb. The following Sunday he rode into town, a quiet storm of a man. He didn't come alone. Elena walked proudly beside him, her sons flanking her like a royal guard. Caleb didn't need to raise his voice or make threats. He just stood there, his presence as solid and unmovable as the land he worked. His voice was low but carried across the silent street. "They belong because I say they do," he stated simply. "And because they work harder than most of you ever will." His words hung in the air, answered only by a stunned, grudging silence. Time moved on, and the seasons turned. They faced storms, both the kind that raged in the sky and the kind that brewed inside the human heart. One night, a fire erupted in the far pasture. Whipped by a ferocious wind, the flames grew with terrifying speed. Panic seized the boys. Elena froze, trapped in the horrifying memory of the accident that had stolen her husband. In that moment of terror, Caleb grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice cutting through her fear. "You're not losing everything again. Not tonight." Together, they fought the fire. An army of 5 against the raging inferno, armed with buckets, dirt, sweat, and a desperate will to survive. When the last ember was extinguished, they stood beneath a sky streaked with smoke and stars, exhausted and shaken, but alive. And in that moment, under that vast watching sky, Elena understood. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a rebuilding. They were rebuilding their lives from the ashes together. In the weeks that followed, the town began to come to them, quietly at first, one by one. A sack of grain left on the porch, a muttered apology in the general store, a job offer for Ethan for when he was old enough. The same people who had once turned their backs now stood at the edge of the ranch, humbled by the resilience they had witnessed. Caleb never said, "I told you so," and Elena never asked for their apology. They didn't need to. The mended fences spoke for themselves. One calm evening, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the land, Elena sat with Caleb on the porch, watching her boys play freely in the yard. Their laughter was the music of the ranch now. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," she said, her voice soft. Caleb kept his eyes on the children, a gentle smile on his face. "You already have," he replied. "You brought life back to this place." It was then that she truly understood. Home wasn't about four walls or a deed of ownership. It wasn't about getting permission from others to exist. Home was a place where your pain could finally rest. Where children were seen as a blessing, not a burden. Where a widow wasn't defined by her loss, but by the love and strength she still carried. The town that had once rejected her had taught her a valuable lesson. Being rejected doesn't mean you're unworthy. It often just means you're misunderstood. And sometimes the only thing needed to change a life, to heal a broken heart, is for one person to have the courage to say the words the rest of the world refuses to speak. "You home now." The boys grew strong and tall, their roots digging deep into the rich soil of the ranch. The land thrived under their care. And Elena Harper, once an outcast, once invisible, stood firmly planted in the place that finally saw her for who she was. Not as a widow, not as a burden, but as family. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that explores the power of the human spirit. We'll see you in the next video.